I feel like probably over these last couple of weeks is when I've probably started feeling my best. Obviously, my ankle kind of didn't allow me to really see where my groin was at. It was, I think.
What happens when the undisputed savior of a financially drowning sports league suddenly discovers that the very athletes she is desperately trying to uplift are aggressively working behind the scenes to destroy everything she represents? For decades, the WNBA crawled on its hands and knees begging for mainstream recognition, desperately praying for a transcendent superstar capable of filling arenas to capacity, sending television ratings through the roof, and finally injecting serious, sustainable money into a league that had been hemorrhaging financially for years. They didn't just want a good player. They wanted a full-blown cultural earthquake. And then Caitlin Clark walked through the door, carrying the staggering weight of an unprecedented generational movement squarely on her shoulders and single-handedly rewiring the entire economic infrastructure of women's basketball overnight. Any rational human being would naturally assume that the battle-hardened veterans of the league would enthusiastically roll out the red carpet for the extraordinary rookie who multiplied their viewership by a factor of 10 and flooded their product with millions of brand-new, passionate eyeballs. Instead, those same veterans painted the largest, most visible target imaginable directly on her back, launching one of the most poisonous and openly hostile welcomes ever witnessed in the entire history of professional sports. From the precise moment her sneakers touched professional hardwood, it became overwhelmingly and undeniably clear that this was not going to be some warm, nurturing sisterhood or any kind of supportive environment for a young woman still learning the professional game. This was a savage, brutally physical, and deeply calculated psychological initiation, engineered from the ground up with one singular purpose: to destroy the golden child before she ever had the opportunity to get comfortable in her new arena. The sheer volcanic volume of hostility directed at a 22-year-old rookie was nothing short of absolutely breathtaking, constructing a powder keg atmosphere that was always, inevitably, destined to detonate. And it didn't require much time at all for that dangerously simmering tension to erupt into a full-scale inferno on live, national television. But that early wave of resentment was merely the surface layer of a much deeper, far more sinister story. To genuinely comprehend the magnitude of chaos that detonated on those courts, you have to surgically look past the box scores and plunge headfirst into the dark, festering financial jealousy that was quietly shredding the WNBA apart from the inside out. For more than 2 decades, veteran players ground themselves to the bone pushing through punishing, relentless schedules, crammed into suffocating commercial airline seats, enduring brutal multi-hour layovers between cities, and collecting base salaries that were a gross, insulting misrepresentation of their world-class athletic brilliance. Countless of these women were financially compelled to pack their bags and play overseas in Russia or Turkey during the off-season just to earn something resembling a livable wage, subjecting their bodies to unimaginable, career-shortening punishment in the process. Then Clark materialized, stepping directly out of a college gymnasium and immediately pocketing a staggering $28 million signature shoe contract with Nike before she had logged a single solitary professional minute on the floor. Almost as if someone had flipped a hidden switch, the league suddenly and miraculously discovered an abundance of corporate sponsorships and long-dormant funding to outfit every single team with the luxury of private charter flights, an upgrade the veteran players had been vocally, passionately demanding for well over a decade. Rather than embracing this monumental improvement to their daily professional lives, a suffocating, coal-black cloud of bitterness descended over the old guard like a funeral shroud. They felt with absolute conviction that their collective years of blood, sacrifice, and suffering had been completely rendered invisible by a media machine obsessed with a rookie who hadn't yet proven a single thing at the professional level, while she was simultaneously handed the full keys to an entire kingdom. This towering financial imbalance cultivated a deeply unspoken but universally understood vendetta inside locker rooms from coast to coast. The veterans understood with painful clarity that they could never touch Clark's astronomical bank account, and they certainly possessed zero power to prevent millions of devoted fans from wiping out her entire jersey inventory within mere hours of its release. But they knew with absolute certainty that they could get their hands directly on her between the 4 lines of a basketball court. The hardwood became the singular arena where they could extract their bitter, petty revenge, willfully discarding every principle of sportsmanship in exchange for raw, unfiltered, cold-blooded intimidation. And the manner in which they chose to execute that intimidation campaign would leave the entire sports world utterly stupefied and slack-jawed. The physical aggression escalated with frightening speed, rocketing well past the boundaries of standard rookie hazing and careening straight into genuinely dangerous, lawsuit-worthy territory that had fans screaming themselves hoarse at their television screens. Opposing teams appear to operate under some silent, collectively understood agreement that the only acceptable strategy for neutralizing the overwhelming Clark phenomenon was to hit her, and to hit her with every ounce of force they could legally and illegally generate. The highly controversial, widely viral moments cascaded week after merciless week. Players deliberately lowering their shoulders into her ribcage, throwing naked hip checks with complete indifference to where the basketball was located, and delivering sledgehammer fouls so flagrant and reckless they would have ignited full-scale brawls and triggered multi-game suspensions in virtually any other professional sports league on the planet. This was a calculated, meticulously choreographed campaign of sustained physical intimidation, precision-engineered to rattle the rookie's legendary composure, systematically break down her body, and dismantle her deep shooting range from the outside in. The officiating crews, in a manner that struck millions of observers as deeply suspicious and almost inexplicable, appeared to collectively swallow their whistles every single time Clark found herself in the crosshairs, permitting a level of targeted physicality that genuinely bordered on criminal negligence toward the league's most irreplaceable asset. Analysts, Hall of Fame former players, and prominent media personalities sat in stunned, bewildered silence as the WNBA's undisputed golden goose was repeatedly deposited onto the hardwood floor with absolutely no meaningful consequences, no ejections, and no accountability. The exhausted, hollow narrative aggressively peddled by veteran players and their media defenders was that this was simply grown woman basketball and that the hyped-up rookie needed to earn her respect through suffering the way everyone else supposedly had. But anyone in possession of functioning eyesight could see with crystal clarity that this was an intensely personal, targeted vendetta designed entirely to humiliate and publicly humble her on the grandest stages the sport could offer. What the league catastrophically failed to anticipate was that attempting to physically and psychologically dismantle Caitlin Clark was the single most catastrophic miscalculation they could ever have made. The establishment's frantic, desperate crusade to knock the superstar down from her pedestal stretched far beyond the beatings administered on the court, ultimately culminating in one of the most jaw-dropping and bitterly debated decisions in recent sports memory. As the summer months drew near, the eagerly anticipated roster announcement for the United States Olympic women's basketball team loomed on the horizon, and virtually every credible sports analyst breathing oxygen on this planet operated under the collective assumption that Clark was an absolute, ironclad certainty for that squad. She was pacing all rookies in scoring by a wide margin, atomizing assist records that had stood for years, and generating television ratings numbers that the Olympic Committee could typically only fantasize about achieving under the most ideal circumstances imaginable. Yet, in a move that sent seismic shockwaves crashing through every corner of the sports world, the selection committee made the deliberately calculated decision to leave her entirely off the roster, choosing instead to load the team with aging veterans and well-established names who carried a microscopic fraction of her enormous cultural footprint. The official justifications offered by the committee collapsed immediately under the slightest scrutiny. Hollow, unconvincing claims about shielding her from outside pressure or citing her supposed lack of international experience at the elite level. But the raw, unvarnished truth was sitting in plain sight for absolutely anyone willing to open their eyes and look directly at it. The WNBA's entrenched old guard simply refused to allow the rookie to commandeer their spotlight on the grandest global stage in all of sports, and they had absolutely zero intention of willingly sharing a locker room with the young woman who was effortlessly exposing every one of their deep-seated, petty insecurities on a nightly basis. It was the ultimate act of institutional cruelty, a massive, deliberate middle finger launched by the establishment with the singular purpose of reminding the young prodigy exactly who believed they were still in charge of women's basketball. They fully anticipated she would fire back at the cameras, unleash a highly emotional public tantrum, or allow the gut-wrenching rejection to completely unravel her entire debut professional season before it ever had the chance to fully breathe. But her reaction to that Olympic snub would lay the foundation for one of the most breathtaking revenge tours in modern sports history, ultimately leaving every single one of her detractors completely and utterly speechless. Rather than handing the ravenous media the explosive meltdown they were practically salivating over in anticipation, Clark absorbed the staggering Olympic disrespect with a terrifying, ice-cold, almost supernatural level of professional composure. She positioned herself in front of a wall of microphones, looked directly into the cameras without a single visible tremor, and calmly articulated that the rejection had simply gifted her with additional time to rest her body, sharpen her craft in practice, and pour every molecule of her energy entirely into the Indiana Fever season. It was an absolute masterclass in crisis-level public relations management. But lurking just beneath that serene, unreadable exterior, something extraordinarily dangerous had been permanently and irreversibly ignited deep within her competitive soul. The brutal, relentless combination of sustained physical punishment absorbed on the court, the scandalously blatant double standard applied by officials who refused to protect her, and the crowning insult of the Olympic exclusion had collectively detonated something inside her that was never going back into its container. Throughout the opening months of the season, she had made a deliberate, conscious effort to extend the olive branch, absorbing cheap shots with a polished smile plastered across her face and steadfastly refusing to engage with the constant torrent of degrading trash talk being hurled at her from every direction by opponents fueled entirely by jealousy and resentment. She had been executing the public relations playbook with absolute textbook precision, bending over backwards to avoid disturbing the waters of a league that had made its seething contempt for her arrival abundantly, painfully clear from day one. But as the weeks on the calendar flipped forward and the brazen, unrelenting disrespect continued to pile up with zero meaningful response or intervention from the league's front office, Clark arrived at a cold, crystalline, unavoidable realization. Playing the role of the gracious, humble, perpetually smiling rookie was accomplishing absolutely nothing except providing her enemies with an easier, more stationary target. She understood with iron certainty that surviving and ultimately dominating inside this aggressively toxic professional environment was going to require her to permanently retire the people-pleasing act and start meeting every single aggressor with the exact same ruthless, take-no-prisoners competitive ferocity they had been recklessly bringing to her doorstep. The carefully media-trained, endlessly agreeable darling from the cornfields of Iowa was officially, permanently gone, surgically replaced by a stone-cold, battle-hardened competitor who had swallowed her very last dose of disrespect and was completely, irrevocably finished accepting any more. And the full, catastrophic release of that dangerously accumulated, pressure-cooked frustration was moments away from being broadcast in high definition to an audience of millions around the entire globe. The long building storm finally tore through the walls during a massively hyped, electric primetime showdown against the reigning WNBA champions, the Las Vegas Aces. The atmosphere swirling inside that enormous arena was nothing short of absolutely volcanic. Packed shoulder to shoulder all the way up to the highest rafters with die-hard, frenzied fans who had paid jaw-dropping premium prices for the privilege of watching the rookie sensation go to war against the most fearsome, battle-tested dynasty the league had ever produced. Standing across the hardwood in direct opposition was Tiffany Hayes, a supremely seasoned, granite-tough veteran enforcer who had dramatically emerged from full retirement to sign with the Aces' juggernaut roster in pursuit of one final championship glory run. Hayes was the living, breathing embodiment of the old-school WNBA mentality in every conceivable way. Ferociously aggressive, completely and defiantly unapologetic, and thoroughly, visibly unimpressed by the deafening media spectacle swirling around the Indiana Fever's franchise cornerstone. From the precise millisecond of the opening tip-off, Hayes locked in with laser-focused, almost maniacal personal determination to burrow completely under Clark's skin and systematically dismantle her rhythm from the opening possession onward. She deployed a suffocating, brutally physical defensive approach, aggressively bodying the rookie off every preferred spot on the floor, launching stray elbows into her ribs inside the paint, clutching fistfuls of jersey fabric far away from any basketball activity, and maintaining a relentless, poisonous stream of degrading, deeply personal trash talk poured directly into her ear on every single trip up and down the court. It was an absolute, clinical masterclass in veteran psychological manipulation, precisely the brand of calculated, borderline dirty gamesmanship engineered from decades of experience to make a young, emotionally exposed player completely implode and self-destruct in front of a primetime national audience. Through the opening quarters of the ferocious contest, Clark absorbed the punishment with gritted-teeth determination, channeling every last ounce of willpower into letting her breathtaking passing vision and deep-range shooting genius carry her through the storm rather than taking the bait. But every human being walking the face of this earth carries within them a finite breaking point. And the suffocating, unrelenting psychological siege being orchestrated by the veteran enforcer was milliseconds away from triggering a response of such staggering magnitude that not a single soul inside that packed arena could have seen it coming from 1,000 miles away. In a blindingly explosive sequence that detonated across every social media platform on the internet with the velocity of a nuclear shockwave, the most talked-about rookie in the history of the sport finally, completely, and spectacularly snapped. Following yet another nakedly flagrant physical exchange near the perimeter, one that the officiating crew, with almost comedic predictability, chose to observe in complete, complicit silence, Hayes crossed an invisible but universally understood line, delivering something intensely personal that shattered every remaining boundary of competitive sportsmanship. And this time, rather than retreating to the sideline, absorbing the blow quietly, or lodging another futile complaint with the hopelessly indifferent officials as she had been conditioned to do time and again throughout the season, Clark planted both feet directly into the hardwood floor, rotated back to face the imposing veteran without a single millisecond of hesitation, and unleashed a completely ferocious, totally unfiltered torrent of her own ferocious, unrestrained trash talk fired back with equal and matching venom. The broadcast cameras lurched forward and rapidly zoomed in tight as the young rookie fearlessly closed the distance and got directly, defiantly into Hayes' face, refusing to surrender so much as a single solitary inch of ground to the intimidating veteran champion standing before her. It was a completely monumental, landscape-obliterating shift in her entire public demeanor and competitive identity. This was no longer the carefully composed, quietly accommodating young woman desperately trying to earn her place and blend seamlessly into a hostile environment. This was a ferocious, completely and utterly unyielding competitor, aggressively and unmistakably serving notice to the entire old guard that she was permanently, irrevocably finished absorbing their punishment for even one single second longer. The heated, volcanic exchange escalated so rapidly and with such staggering intensity that players from both benches had to urgently sprint onto the floor and physically insert themselves between the two combatants before the situation spiraled completely beyond recovery. The underlying tension hanging over that arena was so suffocatingly thick it could have been sliced clean through with the blade of a machete. Clark's eyes burned with a raw, undiluted competitive fire so blazing and visible that it entirely silenced even the most hostile and antagonistic sections of the opposing crowd into stunned, uncomfortable quiet. She barked directly back at the seasoned veteran with zero hesitation and zero apology, aggressively matching every ounce of physical aggression and verbal intensity word for devastating word, definitively and publicly proving to every person inside that building and everyone watching at home that the deeply premeditated intimidation campaign had collapsed completely and utterly in catastrophic failure. But the league's perpetually scrutinized disciplinary committee had been watching the entire explosive exchange with microscopic, hawk-eyed attention, and they were about to render a wildly controversial, breathtakingly hypocritical verdict that would rip the curtain back and expose the organization's most deep-rooted, long-concealed institutional biases for the entire sports world to examine. Almost immediately following the moment the verbal confrontation reached its absolute, scorching apex, the officials who had been conveniently invisible and silent for the better part of the entire game suddenly and selectively discovered their whistles, swiftly and decisively handing Caitlin Clark a heavily controversial technical foul for her participation in the confrontation. It was a staggeringly tone-deaf, entirely indefensible moment of officiating double standards that served as the single most perfect encapsulation yet of the league's bizarre, deeply unfair, and thoroughly inexplicable treatment of its most important, most irreplaceable superstar. The battle-hardened veterans had been openly and repeatedly permitted to physically assault her, deliver naked hip checks with zero regard for the basketball, and verbally abuse and demean her for months on end with barely a cursory, meaningless warning issued from the officiating crews. But the precise instant the rookie summoned the courage to stand her ground and match their verbal aggression with equivalent fire and intensity, she was the one immediately penalized, flagged, and publicly villainized by the very institution that owed its entire financial resurgence to her existence. In the immediate aftermath of the nationally televised game, the WNBA front office chose not to quietly let the moment pass. They aggressively and very publicly doubled down on the referee's absurd, indefensible decision, slapping Clark with a mandatory, heavily publicized financial fine for accumulating what they deemed an excessive number of technical fouls across the span of her rookie season. For any ordinary first-year player grinding along on the league's brutally restrictive base salary structure of approximately $70,000 annually, these compounding, escalating technical foul fines represented a deeply serious and genuinely crippling financial punishment that could meaningfully alter a player's quality of life. But the profoundly out-of-touch league front office had made the catastrophic strategic error of completely forgetting, or perhaps willfully ignoring, the specific and entirely extraordinary individual they were attempting to discipline in this particular situation. When directly confronted about the financial penalty during a packed, widely attended post-game press conference with cameras and microphones pointed in her direction from every conceivable angle, Clark did not offer a single trembling, tearful word of apology. She did not step to the podium to lament the fundamental unfairness of the situation, and she most certainly did not deliver a carefully sanitized, lawyer-approved statement of manufactured contrition and deep institutional regret. Instead, she settled comfortably back into her chair, allowed a massive, slow, entirely knowing smirk to spread deliberately across her face, and proceeded to laugh the entire penalty off with a casual, unbothered ease of someone swatting away a mildly irritating gnat. It was the single most devastating and perfectly executed flex imaginable under the circumstances. A subtle yet absolutely lethal reminder delivered to the entire organization that the WNBA's archaic, antiquated penalty structure was a completely laughable, meaningless financial inconvenience when measured against the tens of millions of dollars she was actively and single-handedly generating both for herself and for the very league that was now attempting to levy fines against her. She was, in the most literal and spectacular sense imaginable, settling a trivial parking ticket with a limitless black card while the entire sports world watched in stunned admiration. And the sheer, breathtaking audacity of her thoroughly public, completely unbothered reaction sent undeniable, bone-deep shockwaves reverberating through every bitter, resentful veteran locker room across the entire league. What had begun as a coordinated, institutional attempt to humble and diminish the most transformative figure the sport of women's basketball had ever produced had instead achieved the precise opposite outcome. It had stripped away every last remaining layer of restraint and cordiality, and revealed beneath it something that her enemies had catastrophically, fatally underestimated from the very beginning. The physical assaults had not broken her. The Olympic exclusion had not derailed her. The biased officiating had not discouraged her. The financial fines had not silenced her. Every single weapon the establishment had deployed against her had ricocheted back and struck them with compounding, multiplied force. The league had spent an entire season desperately attempting to remind the rookie of her place within the existing hierarchy of women's basketball. What they had achieved instead was the complete and total awakening of a generational competitor who now understood with absolute clarity that the gloves were permanently off, that the rules of engagement had been irrevocably rewritten, and that the full, unleashed, unfiltered version of Caitlin Clark was only just beginning to make herself known to a watching world. The old guard had poked the single most dangerous individual in the history of their sport one time too many, and the consequences of that catastrophic miscalculation were about to rain down on the entire league with a force and velocity that nobody inside those walls had the foresight to prepare for.